What's going on? My name is Nate Brody, and welcome to the Magic Sandwich Show. I'm your guest host today, and today we have a huge show for you. All right, we are talking Second Amendment. But before we get into talking the Second Amendment, there are some people who I must thank that make this show possible. And without them, we wouldn't be able to do this. So first, it's going to be Fabio, Hannah, Deidre, Dee, Vincent, Jackie, and Agrippa. And there are many, many others. And if I didn't name you, it wasn't because of any slight, but without these people, we wouldn't be able to bring you this show. And they've been a tremendous help. And a special thanks to Dragonaut Silvis and JD Kane and DPR Jones, because they do an amazing job, and it takes a lot to make this show happen. So today, the question of today is going to be, what limits, if any, should there be on the Second Amendment? And if there are limits, what are we talking about? Are we talking about banning guns altogether, or should we have some reasonable regulations? Now, today we have two people who are very knowledgeable about the topic, who I'm going to introduce you to. So first, let me throw it to Jim from Atheist Edge. Jim, please introduce yourself to the people.
Hi, I'm Jim Hall. I'm 25% of Atheist Edge. I'm the face of the operation. And let's see, we are on, of course, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, Stitcher, FM Player. You can find us Atheist Edge on Patreon, and we have a PayPal as well. And we've been around almost 3 years. We're almost 8,000 subscribers, so we're still a little fish in the sea. Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, listen, thanks for being here. And to our other distinguished guest, Progressive Liberal. And that means he's voted for Trump. This is a Trump supporter we got.
Oh, God.
Well, introduce yourself. Let people
I just
know
lost all of my subscribers.
Oh,
no. First of all, thank you guys for having me here. This is awesome. I am Progressive Liberal. I am half of the Pro Lib Show, which I do with my good friend Mikey Famine, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday nights at 9 p.m., where we talk about politics. And you can find me on Twitter at Pro Lib Show. You can find the Patreon, you can find the Mixer, the Twitch, all that good stuff. 331 subscribers. So we're the smallest fish in the sea. But I am really, really appreciative that you have me here. Thank you very much.
Well, listen, thank you guys for coming on the show. Now, as you guys can see, I got a bulletproof vest on, but it's not the actual vest before you start calling the cops and tell them to raid my house because I have a bulletproof vest on. This is just the shell. So it's actually empty. And don't, no threats in the live chat. But today, because we have a society who are addicted to firearms, and I myself, just like everyone else, feels that there's an issue here. We have mass shootings. We have a lot of different things that occur, and the question of the day is: number one, do we still need a Second Amendment? And if so, what are some reasonable, or if any, limitations should be placed upon it? Now, first, I think it's good to start with a little background about what the Second Amendment is and how it's gotten to where it is today. And the first thing I'd like to just point out is that before our country was founded, there was an issue with what we call violence of the government. The governments back in feudal times had a monopoly on violence. So normal people weren't really able to be armed. And that not being able to be armed gave the government all the power. So our founders wanted to stop that. They said, no, we don't want the government to have a monopoly on violence. And that's where the Second Amendment comes in. But there was always a question. Was the Second Amendment a right for an individual, or was it a right for the government? The wording of the amendment didn't really help. And I'll read it right now, since we're talking about the wording of the amendment. It says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state to keep the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But the key point of that is that was this a right for state governments and militias, or was this an individual right? Now, we've recently had two cases in the past 20 years that have answered that question affirmatively, saying that yes, this is an individual right. And the right particularly is the right for someone to defend their home. Let me read the exact text of that right. Supreme Court Justice Scalia mentions that a man's home is his castle, and the right for you to protect your home with the firearm is a fundamental right that is protected in the Constitution. Now, that right was first only extended to federal jurisdictions in a case called DC, known as DC v. Heller, and then extended to the states through a process called substantive due process with a case called McDonald v. City of Chicago. So there were two prohibitions that the court found that the government could enforce. The first prohibition was against felons owning firearms, and that the Supreme Court also said the government could prohibit something like the mentally ill from possessing firearms. The Supreme Court also said that you could limit firearms from being possessed in places like schools and government buildings or even concert halls. And you could impose conditions on commercial sales, like the Brady Bill. So those are the three limitations to the right to own a firearm in your own home. So now I'll throw it to the panelists. First, Jim. Jim, do you think the Second Amendment is an absolute right, or do you believe that right should be curtailed in some way?
Well, okay. Let's look at the three branches of government. If we wanted to change this, the judicial branch is not the way, because just like you said, all the precedents have been established. It's what do you call it? It's made law. It's unchangeable now from the judicial level. There's already established precedents. So if we were going to want to change it, we got to go through the legislative branch. And now the question is, well, first off, we're a democratic society. We let the people vote. We let the people vote on this, and we have healthy, spirited, robust debates, just like is going on now or wherever, and that's the way to do it. We need to open up the dialogue, and we need to eliminate the thinking with emotions. We have to stay level-headed when we're thinking about this. And everyone's going to have their own biases and want to insert I want to just keep my guns because I love them. Well, okay, put that aside. Step out of your bias, and let's look at the stats, the figures, and would changing the Second Amendment decrease the amount of firearms-related deaths? We could start there.
Well, how do you feel about that? Go ahead. Let us know.
Well,
conservative Republican.
Right. Conservative Republican. I love it. I think a little bit more context. So it was the Second Amendment. It was ratified in 1791 and it was written by James Madison. The fight was between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And the Anti-Federalists didn't like a federal government. And the Federalists believed that a strong federal government was the only way to keep the states together. That if the government at the top wasn't strong, that the government, the union itself would dissolve.
But don't forget you did have the disaster of the Articles of Confederation.
Sure, no, that's why there had to be a constitutional convention. Absolutely. So I think Madison was a very, very smart guy, and I think he worded the Second Amendment as ambiguously as he did on purpose. He also capitalized arms. It's a capital A. It's not a lowercase a. And that was important when you wrote legal documents back then. The commas, where the commas are placed, was also very, very important. So I think that Madison was a Federalist. Absolutely. He believed that a strong federal government would result in the Union itself surviving. And I think that he was also terrified of that federal organization becoming a monarchy. He was scared of that. And I think that the Second Amendment was part of his effort to keep those things together by appeasing the Anti-Federalists, but also ensuring that the government had power. So I believe that the Second Amendment does give a fundamental right to own and bear arms with a capital A. And the precedent is clear. Right? I mean, Chicago and Heller they're clear. There's no ambiguity in them at all, except for that they're both 5-4 rulings by the Supreme Court. So there were dissenting opinions.
But, that being the case, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that we need 100-round drum magazines for rifles. It doesn't mean that I can sell a gun to my brother without a background check. It doesn't mean that 3 days is good enough for a background check to come back. It doesn't mean that there needs to be gun show loopholes. I do have the right as an American to own and operate a firearm, but I don't have the right to use it irresponsibly. So I think that restricting ammunition, restricting magazines, and maybe restricting ownership, saying, here's the total amount of guns that a person could use, or requiring insurance like you do to own a home or a car. I think all of these things are perfectly reasonable, and they don't violate that Second Amendment.
Well, I want to. Well, let me throw out a question then, because it seems like you're both on the same point. But what about the Second Amendment advocates that say we don't negotiate rights? We have the right to own a gun, and we don't negotiate rights. We won't negotiate the right of free speech. We won't negotiate the right to, if as an African American, the right to be free. So we don't want to negotiate our right to bear arms to tyrannical government.
The lethality of the weapons now is much different than the lethality when the law was written. Amendments get tweaked. If we don't have to completely do away with the Second Amendment, it's part of our Constitution. I can't remember what amendment. There was a time when women and blacks couldn't vote. Amendments get tweaked and added and changed.
Sure.
We have to consider the lethality now. As far as I understand, any weapon that you can be privately owned in a civilian household is a semi-automatic weapon at best, right? Unless you have like a Class 3 dealer's license.
Right.
Yeah. So we're not even talking fully auto. We're talking semi-auto. And just up front, anyone who think I've grappled with what an assault weapon means. I don't understand, because an AR-15 fires at the exact same rate as any pistol, any semi-automatic pistol out there. It's no faster at the cyclic rate than a pistol. All right.
Well, let me get my man, our new guest, Slim Jim, in here. What's up, Slim Jim? Seems like you're driving. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes. I hope you don't get pulled over by the cops for talking to me. Then we're going to have to test the Second Amendment on the spot right now. So how you doing, Jim?
I'm hands-free right now, so I should be back to where I'm going in just a minute. But this will do for now.
Cool. So what are your thoughts on what you've heard? And also, but before you start, give a quick introduction of who you are. Tell the people where they can find you, and then let us know how you feel about the Second Amendment.
Okay, so as you may have guessed, I am Slim Jim. I used to be kind of active on YouTube, but my social media presence is pretty nil nowadays. I mostly just use the internet for gaming. But if you absolutely feel like you want to find me, you can find me on YouTube. I think my channel name is The Slim Jim, because Slim Jim was taken by some jerky company. I don't know. Some of you who watch Nate or Dragnut may know me from some of the live streams I've done with them in the past. That being said, as far as the Second Amendment goes, I'm pretty pro Second Amendment. I have a history in military and law enforcement as far as professional experience goes. So I work a shooter job, and I don't particularly have an issue with civilian firearm ownership.
Well, just before you got in, there were some restrictions mentioned. For instance, liberal progressive was saying things like magazines, and Atheist Edge was saying things like the types of guns. Do you agree with those type of restrictions on the Second Amendment?
Not particularly. I mean, for the vast majority of our country.
So you cut. Jim, you might have to refresh. You're cutting in and out. You're cutting in and out a little bit.
Sorry,
We'll get back to you in a second. No worries, no worries. So what do you guys think about that? Well, Jim and Atheist Edge, because I can't say Jim because we got two Jims. I'm like Jim,
right.
throw it out.
Well, in the
very
private chat with your production manager, I guess we're talking about how to sensibly define the term assault weapon without defining other weapons not commonly considered assault weapons into that category. Well, I think the onus is on the person that even wants to use the term. I just don't use the term assault weapon. I mean, it's either semi-automatic, 3-round burst, or fully automatic, right? And only one of those three is legal to own and operate. So I think we're just talking about revolvers and semi-autos right now.
Yeah, and another distinction that someone proposed one time that I really, really liked was, what if guns were classified by whether they were for hunting or whether they were for home defense, that sort of thing. That's the kind of thing that I would really love to see, because it helps people who aren't as knowledgeable about weapons to better understand what their function is.
One thing you didn't, Progressive, that you didn't add in your list of restrictions that we could maybe consider too is you did background checks, and I assume we're both on the same page there for really tightening up the screws on that, closing up the gun show loophole. For those of you that don't know, if you buy a weapon through a gun show, there is no background check. Am I correct there? Yeah, because it's not a federal mandate.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay.
That's the gun show. So, Jim, what do you think about those restrictions, the gun show loophole, and the ones that Atheist Edge?
There is no such thing as a gun show loophole. Even vendors at gun shows are still required to have their purchasers go through a federal background check and comply with all state and federal laws and regulations regarding it. What people commonly refer to as a gun show loophole are private sellers to private sellers.
Right, that's what I was about to say.
Yes.
But
okay.
I will be right back. I'm about to go through the gate, and I got to mute so that the MPs don't haul me away.
All right.
Okay, so I guess Progressive and I are maybe on the same page that I don't know what's entailed in that federal background check, but every time I buy a weapon, I'm in and out of the store in 20 minutes. So it can't be that robust. And maybe we could look at some other tighten the screws on that to begin with.
Okay, so for instance, the El Paso shooter, okay? Right now, the federal mandate is a 3-day waiting period. So you have to wait. If I'm selling you a gun and I'm a retailer, a gun retailer, I have to wait 3 days to hear back. If I don't hear back in 3 days, I can still sell you that weapon, even if I don't hear from them. So what we're talking about is a 10-day period instead of 3, and that if I don't hear back, I can't sell you a gun.
But what are they looking at in that background check? I'm sure criminal history. What else?
I know that it's criminal history. I know that they check with the FBI database.
If you are a convict of a violent felony, are you excluded? Can you buy a weapon?
It's illegal for you to buy. If you're a convicted felon, it's illegal for you. Both on the federal
who else?
Both states.
Who else? How about with someone with? Now we're getting into a gray area, but someone with a high risk, prone to violence type of mental deficiency. I know we're getting into a gray area there because it's hard to determine sometimes.
Sure.
And sometimes it's temporary. Sometimes you become better and then maybe reapply. I don't know.
Right. Sure. One thing that I've heard proposed before that I'm in favor of would be setting up some sort of system where anyone that purchases a weapon has to be cleared medically. So they have to see a certified professional. So you'd have certified mental health professionals that would do a standardized check of some kind, and that you would need to be reevaluated periodically, whether it was 3 months or 9 months or every year, every 3 years or something, to kind of close that mental health loophole. I'm not a mental health professional. It sounds good, but I'd want like a psychiatrist or somebody to weigh in and talk about that more. But it's something that I would be in favor of as a voter, if that makes sense.
But then, so what would you say to the people that would argue that legal, lawful gun owners who are not mentally ill, these restrictions are going to make it harder for them to exercise their constitutional right, and by doing these things, by making it harder, isn't it more or less cutting away at the core purpose of the Second Amendment, giving people the right to bear arms against a tyrannical government?
If you have been convicted of 3 DUIs, your license to drive gets taken away.
But don't forget, your license to drive is a privilege. The right to drive, you don't have a right to drive. It's a privilege to drive. It's not a right.
I mean, this is what I would say to them. Buying a home is a real bitch too.
Yeah. And the 400-pound gorilla in the room, at least for me, that we haven't even addressed yet, is training.
Yeah.
I'm a combat marksmanship instructor. I was in the Marine Corps, and the importance of training. And these are Marines that do it all the time. I mean, we are constantly armed. We go eat chow armed. We're always armed.
Right.
And even then, and we do training, an amount of training that I would not even propose civilians do. There's got to be a happy medium. But even then, highly trained, we have at least any unit in any active duty military is going to have at least one negligent discharge. We call them ND. At least one ND a month. And bad things happen when you have an ND. Trained soldiers and Marines will have a negligent discharge. Getting to the range and a requirement to what's the required range training for someone to get a license to carry in the States right now? It's a weekend, and then you never have to go back to the range again.
Right.
And that's unsatisfactory.
I think in most states you pay.
But then the argument until Slim Jim comes back. But the argument is that now you're forcing people, law-abiding citizens, to pay to exercise a constitutional right. It's just like a poll tax. If you're forcing me to do all this to exercise that right, it's just not fair. I gotta now have a license. I gotta do this. I gotta do this to exercise a constitutional right. It's like, for instance, here in New York, it costs us $500 to get a license, and I think that's unfair. But go ahead, Jim. What you're about to say?
Yeah, if I could just chime in with a bit of a rhetorical question.
Go ahead.
Why should I have to prove to you that I am, I guess, for lack of a better word, qualified to exercise my rights?
You have to go to driving school to drive a car. That's a silly question. No.
But that's
I'm sorry.
Driving is not.
Do I have a right to drive?
Absolutely, you have the right.
No,
you
it's
have
a privilege.
Yeah.
I have a right to travel between place to place, yes, but I don't have a right to drive a car on a public highway.
Okay, that's fair. But I also have the right to not get shot by people when I'm out doing things with my family who are mentally ill and who are incapable of a firearm. So
you have the right to defend yourself and return fire.
You're infringing upon my 14th Amendment right to privacy.
That's some good damn points, guys. I don't know what to think.
Hold on.
Should I interject something else?
Go ahead, Jim. Yeah, it's on you. Go ahead, Jim.
So the Constitution and the Bill of Rights protects us from the government, not from each other, for one. And two, you have the right to return fire and defend yourself, but not necessarily the right not to get shot. I mean, I have a right not to have a piano fall on me when they're hoisting it up to a 10th floor apartment, but things happen.
Well, I wonder what you would tell Contavia Blackful that. You know what Contavia is?
No, I don't.
Contavia was shot in the head by a stray bullet Monday night, the night before her 12th birthday. She was sitting in her living room with her grandmother, and she got shot in the head Monday night. She died Tuesday on her birthday. The problem is, no, hold on. The problem is that your position assumes that our society is more mature than it actually is. It isn't. People are dying. Real people are dying because we can't handle what we've got. We have to do something, or these people are going to continue to die.
Let me let Jim get in here to respond. Go ahead, Jim.
Was that round fired from a lawfully owned weapon or an unlawfully owned weapon?
That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter.
Really? Well, when it comes to the Second Amendment, why does it matter if it was done legally or illegally? If it was gang violence?
No, because you're saying the constitutional right of the shooter overrules her right to live.
I'm not.
Well, go ahead, Jim.
So, I'm not saying the constitutional right of the shooter overrules her will to or her right to live. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that you can't predict. I mean, the shooter should 100% be held liable for that. Don't get me wrong. What I am saying is that you cannot predict nor prevent every single accident. I mean, more people are killed in car accidents than they are in gun deaths. So if
fuck them.
Hold on. Jim.
So, I mean, if we're following the same logic, we should probably ban cars, because those are, by and large, far more dangerous, even accidentally speaking, than guns are.
No.
Well,
no.
Yeah, traffic-related deaths are
killing
exponentially higher than firearm-related deaths.
That's perverting the argument. Kentavia didn't die to a car; she died to a bullet to the head.
A negligent discharge, right?
Well, hold on, but just to be clear, on one end, I think Jim is making the point that but if she would have died in a car crash, he would be making the same argument against cars as you're making against guns. And I think, and I'm trying to just put Jim's argument in simple terms. We all have the right to move our arms, but the right for me to move my arm stops at your nose. So yes, there is always a balance of constitutional rights, and my right to do something stops when it starts infringing on your right. So Jim is saying, as long as, and I think Jim's point is, as long as it's a law, somebody who's lawfully has their gun, and that's happening, then that's not what we're talking about. If you're talking about some criminal who's not supposed to have a gun and does that, that's just like the drunk driver getting behind the car. Have I said your point in a way that's acceptable, Jim?
Yeah, I'm not objecting to your summary.
Okay, here's my problem with that, though. So what you're saying is that if somebody is a criminal, then they're at fault. If somebody's not a criminal, then they're still at fault. If the action itself is what causes damage, is what hurts someone, it doesn't matter. That person's constitutional rights are thrown out the window because it was done in a way that was unconstitutional. And we shouldn't do anything to try to prevent someone else abusing their constitutional right, because we just have to accept that people are going to abuse their rights and kill people.
There's an EPA. It's the government's attempt to make our drinking water safe for public safety. There are drunken disorderly laws that if you get belligerent in a bar, that you'll get removed. There are government safeguards in place to protect the safety of others, and I don't know if my safety is. The public safety is more important than even a constitutional amendment, I believe. And I think there can be a happy medium. And I think it all comes down to training. When I walk into, say, a motor pool with, 160 Marines with M4s on their back, I don't get near as freaked out as when I walk into a drugstore and I see Joe Blow over there who can't even see he's open carrying. But, that guy hasn't been to the range, if ever.
Right.
And just the way he's carrying himself, there's no way he's trained. That freaks me out way more. If I knew these people walking around were better trained, I would feel a whole lot easier.
So let me throw a question out real quick to Atheist Edge. What other right do you need to be trained before you exercise it?
You need a certain amount of education to perform a certain job.
Well, because like voting, remember there was a test, the voting's test, and then that was found.
Oh, that's a good point.
Like, most rights you don't have to be qualified to use them. You just because you're an American citizen and turned over a certain age, you are able to exercise that right now. But now you're saying this one particular right, there should be these qualifications that I have to exercise it, which would be unique in our constitutional system because no other right has that particular limitation.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
No one dies if I vote illegally. If I go vote illegally, no one dies. That's the problem here, is that exercising this constitutional right irresponsibly kills people or maliciously. There's no way that I could maliciously vote and kill you, right?
Well, just two things. Let me let Jim get in. Go ahead, Jim.
What about the people that are saved by the Second Amendment?
What people would that be?
I mean, the good guy with a gun.
The good guy with a gun. Can you give us cite a time that happened?
I mean, the LA riots and the roof Koreans.
Well, I'll tell you
I've got a stat here.
Oh, hold on. I'll tell you. Me personally, there was one time, when I was in law enforcement, there was one time there was an armed robbery. It was a knife robbery. I had a weapon. I went to the scene, and stopped that particular thing. So
that's a one-off. That's anecdotal, but I don't have.
It was an example.
I can look up the exact numbers, but the stats, the little news bite I've got here is that states that restrict concealed carry have a significantly higher firearm-related murder rate. And I think that's Cato Institute. I can go back and look, but
let me get Slim Jim in here because Slim Jim, you got in a little late. So can you just elaborate on your views on the Second Amendment so we can all just have a clear understanding on how you feel about this topic so we can have a better conversation?
Yeah, I personally don't have an issue with civilians owning small arms.
So you agree with the panel when they say assault weapons, nuclear weapons, or all that is crazy?
Well, I mean, what's an assault weapon?
Yeah, we don't know. We tried to. No one knows. No one can define that.
Right.
So just so we can get a little bit more specific, we're talking about any type of fully automatic weapons, or we're against that. Now, the big issue now in Congress and in the government is about background checks. Should we have more? And 90% of Republicans are against more background checks. So how do you feel about background checks, Jim?
I think that if we enforce the current laws regarding background checks, we probably wouldn't have an issue. But I mean, most background check laws aren't very well followed or enforced to begin with. Sorry, let me adjust here.
I mean, the El Paso shooter, they background checked him. They followed the letter of the law. He still was able to get a gun, and he killed a lot of people with it.
Good point.
That's one out of how many? I mean, how many weren't background checked? And
I mean,
when we're talking about the issues
2,000 people that died.
Well, when we're talking about, I mean, so 2,000 people or 12 people that died is what you said?
I believe it was 22 people. I'd have to check.
22 people. So how many die because of negligent driving issues? But I don't hear you arguing to take away cars.
It's literally a preventive. It would if the law that was passed by the Democrats in February had been made law, he would not have gotten a weapon and killed 24 people.
So is the argument if a right has a possibility of killing someone, then that right should be restricted?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure, of course.
So
yes.
What about all the social media related suicides?
What about them?
I mean, are you in favor of revoking the First Amendment?
I'm not. I have no idea what you're talking. I'm sorry. You're gonna have to explain a little better.
What Jim is trying to say is that if you're making an argument from an inference, you're saying that because there are someone can be killed with a gun, that we should restrict gun ownership on the mass to try to stop these individuals. This young woman who got killed by this person, and Jim is trying to make the point that any rights, like for instance for speech, can also lead to someone's death, but yet we don't consider it we don't consider it to be something that we'd want to restrict because of that reason.
Okay, but here's the issue with that assertion. Mm-hmm. Somebody going on social media and saying, "I'm going to commit suicide." I really don't understand what you're talking. Like somebody going on social media and saying, "I'm going to commit suicide."
No, we're talking about bullying. One person is bullying and saying, you look fat, blah, 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 and causes that person to commit suicide. But they're exercising their right to free speech. And that we're not saying we should force them to go to get education. We shouldn't force them to get a license. It's just like, and people are dying in the same way.
Sure. Here's the difference. The First Amendment isn't a right that gives you something that kills people. The Second Amendment is. It literally gives you something that's entire function is to kill other human beings. The First Amendment just protects you from the government arresting you if you speak out against them. That's what the First Amendment protects. So equating the first to the second in that way, I think, is a giant logical fallacy.
Let me get Jim from Atheist Edge. Well, first let me let you respond, Slim Jim, and then I'm gonna get Jim from Atheist Edge in here.
So there's a common misconception, or I guess it's an unexamined implication of the argument, that people who want to restrict firearms ownership because people with guns have the potential to kill other people. You're not arguing for the prevention of murder. You're arguing for the prevention of some people committing murder. You're still arming the police and military.
Sure.
And these are the same police and military. Do you support Black Lives Matter?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
So you want the only people to have guns are the people who indiscriminately and arbitrarily murder Black people in the inner city.
Wait, what? What are you
Your argument is to by and large restrict, especially the more lethal types of firearms, to police and military, correct?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
But we can't trust the police and military because they indiscriminately murder inner city residents.
Well, I definitely think that we need to have stronger regulations on the police. Yeah, absolutely.
But I think what Jim is saying is that the logical extension of the argument that you placed would be to more or less disarm police then too, because they have this high rate of killing African Americans in the inner city. But before I let you respond to that, let me get Jim from Atheist Edge. And Jim, what are you thinking about?
Well, I got a couple. You made me think. I just quickly researched some stuff. The gun. So I found gun control laws in other countries, developed nations, that have strict gun control laws. It does not statistically or significantly reduce suicide rates. As far as gun murders, we are right now at 2.97 per 100,000 in the population. So 3 gun murders per 100,000. The strictest gun control country is 9.97 murders per 100,000. And that's the strictest. That's our neighbor to the south, Mexico, with the hands down strictest gun control policy there is. The next strictest are Finland and Switzerland. Their murder rate is 0.5 per 100,000. It's lower than us. I don't know if that's significant, but it's also Switzerland. I meant Finland. Switzerland allows, they have the right to bear arms as well, same as us.
So I have to throw this to progressive liberal, because it seems like what Atheist Edge is saying is that there seems to be no correlation between more restrictive gun laws and the outcome that you seem to suggest, less murders, because Mexico, and he's using the statute of Mexico.
Sure. Well, not according to those numbers. I don't. I would need to look at them. You're just throwing a number.
Yeah.
I can't comment on that. But I do know that the El Paso shooter killed 24 people, and he should not have had a weapon. The background check system, as is written right now as a federal law, failed, and those people died. That is an absolute fact.
25% of all mass shootings are committed with an illegal, unregistered weapon. Less than 1% of all gun deaths are from mass shootings. I sound like I'm way pro Second Amendment. I believe me, trust me, I'm not. I'm for major reforms. I actually am probably closer to progressive than I am Slim Jim. I don't know why I'm coming off so pro gun right now, but I'm just throwing facts out there.
Well, no, don't worry about it.
Let me get my man.
Everybody is to the left of me, so
let me get Slim Jim back in here. So, Slim Jim, how do you feel about what you've heard? For instance, the Mexico issue, the fact that Mexico has a higher murder rate but the more restrictive gun laws, and the statistics that Atheist Edge is throwing out there.
Well, not only does Mexico have a lot higher gun laws, but if you adjust U.S. gun violence rates for major metropolitan areas with huge inner city crime issues, the U.S. goes from one of the top countries for violence to one of the lowest.
Well, now
I think it's
go ahead, finish.
Chicago, Baltimore, L.A., and New York, and I think there were one or two other cities, which if you just discount them entirely, it more than halves the amount of gun violence in the U.S.
So we should just go ahead, kill everyone in those cities, and then we won't have problems. I don't understand what your argument is. Like, should we just annihilate everyone in those cities, and then they won't be a problem?
Well, I mean, after we evacuate everybody I know from New York, I wouldn't mind carpet bombing the place.
Okay. It just seems like a very anti-American position. And I know you can't be an anti-American person because you're in the military, and I thank you for your service. It just seems very anti-American of you to say, well, there's huge swaths of our population that aren't as good as the rest. Is that your argument?
Not necessarily that. It's just we have hotspots where there are huge amounts of violence. So rather than looking at gun ownership, for example, as being one of the causes of violence, perhaps we should look elsewhere. That's all I'm saying.
Such as what?
I don't know if I have a solution to the problem, but I'm saying that this illustrates that that gun ownership isn't necessarily a root cause of violence.
Well, I want to throw this out to the panel. What about having people or requiring gun owners to have two things, to have licenses and insurance? Because if they have a license, then they've been trained, and if they have insurance, then if someone gets hurt with their weapon, that person could be compensated for the injury that occurs. What do you think about that, Jim?
As a free marketer, I have no objections to people owning insurance as long as you're not coerced into it.
Well, no, I'm talking about being forced. I'm talking about a law saying if you own a gun, you must have insurance. Just like if you drive a car, you must have insurance.
I don't condone any sort of coercion from the state or federal or even local government.
So is your argument just everything's fine and we don't need to do anything?
No, that's not my argument at all.
So if you can elaborate, what is your position?
My position?
Yeah, because right now, it's just right now that's out there is that it seems like you're saying right now everything is good, and if we take the gun laws we have now and just enforce them, everything should be okay. And that's what it seems like your position is. Is that what we're talking about, or is it more nuanced than that?
No, my position is actually a lot simpler than that. I believe in making gun ownership as accessible as possible to as many people as possible.
Ooh, Atheist Edge, how do you feel about that?
I just don't want to walk into a Walmart and see a kid with an M4 or an AR-15 strapped on his back, and I walk up to him and ask him what are your 5 weapon safety rules, and he stares at me like a deer in the headlights. I would just like to know. I would like to have that peace of mind that anyone that's walking around with a weapon at least knows what the hell that piece of gear does and how to operate it.
But I don't know. But again, I would say from both perspectives, right now we do have a right to own firearms, and it seems like on one side we have, we licensures, insurance, and the other side is saying, well, we don't want to restrict we don't want to restrict citizens who are not criminals, who do everything right, which is the vast majority of gun owners. The vast majority of gun owners are law-abiding citizens who are responsible with their guns, and no one's ever going to get hurt. We're talking about a minority of people who are doing these bad things. So I'm throwing it to progressive liberal. Why should we restrict the rights of the vast majority of people for this small minority of people who do the wrong things? Why not, as Slim Jim says, go after those people and not penalize everyone else?
Because, as I said before, when this constitutional right is abused or used irresponsibly, people die. And Kentavia would have been alive for her birthday on Tuesday, and she should have been. She should have been able to turn 12.
All right, so you know what? I looked this up, and in the UK, they have like a there was like not UK, Germany. It was like a whole bunch of knife deaths or something because people were there was like knives or whatever. And so that logic, then when we talk in Germany or wherever these knife attacks were happening because people couldn't have access to guns, would if we were talking about knives, would you be in favor of restricting knives in that same way?
Well, I think that knives have a lot more uses. I used a knife with dinner and no one died. No one was even injured except for dinner.
But remember that wasn't the argument. The argument is that people do get stabbed because you remember you saying Octavia,
sure.
Octavia, and there's a whole, and we made the argument there was millions of people out there with guns and people, they're not killing anybody. Right. So in the aggregate, what we're talking about in those specific instances, people are stabbed with knives.
Sure,
we're not trying to restrict knives.
Well, I mean, we do restrict knives, so that's not entirely true. There are plenty of restrictions on knives.
Not in Texas.
Well, I mean, getting on an airplane or
right, okay.
There's lots of different places where knives are restricted.
Let me get this question to the panel out real quick. Go ahead, finish.
Oh, sure. But again, I just think it's a logical fallacy. I mean, I drove today. I didn't kill anybody with my car either, but I could have. It could have happened. I can talk about things that actually happened, right? El Paso really happened. It was really a failure. 24 people really died. And that should never happen again. And we can prevent it, and we should.
So, hey, Nate, can I field Tyler Durden's question here?
I was about to read it out, but go ahead. You want to read it?
Okay,
you can read it.
When is an appropriate time to use the Second Amendment against the tyrannical U.S. government? How would that turn out? Let me say, given an average lifespan of 70 years, we are only 5 lifetimes away from a time when this budding new country had to do it. It was a violent armed revolution, and only 4 lifetimes ago, the country split in half, and it was neighbor against neighbor there for a while. The Mason-Dixon line is an imaginary line. There were times when your next door neighbor and you were firing over the fence at each other.
Right, absolutely.
That was 4 lifetimes ago. Who's to say? Especially given now, I'm not a doomsdayer, but given our current political climate, who's to say it couldn't happen again? Now, that being said, let me just also say it would be now a certain percentage of the military will jump ship as well and join a rebellion. I understand that. But that aside, sure. if a squad of 13 Marines walks into your neighborhood and you think that neighborhood is going to it's going to be over in an afternoon. You're not going to have a chance.
It will be over in 5 minutes. They got drones. What are you talking? I don't know.
No, I'm just talking a armed infantry squad with no combined arms, no close air support, just 13 Marines, and that neighborhood's toast.
Dude, 4 Marines. Come on.
Well,
let me just get Slim Jim in here. Just real quick. I'll throw it right back to you. Go ahead, Slim.
As a veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan, I mean, we threw drones, tanks, the best intel collection assets you can imagine at them, and we still haven't managed to completely pacify a mountain range full of goat herders. So
urban areas are different, but yeah, I give you that.
Well, urban areas are a freaking nightmare to fight in.
Here is a question. It seems like I'm gonna pose it to progressive liberal.
Of course you are. It's because it's off your count.
But so all right. So
it's one of my favorite people. No. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, Sock is amazing. So it says, Adian McGrew was a kid killed by a golden retriever. Should the right of someone to live trump the right of the golden retriever? Do we need background checks to own dogs?
Absolutely. No. Here's the difference, Sock account. There is no constitutional right to own a dog. There is a constitutional right to own a weapon. So it's a logical fallacy. It's a great question, but it is a logical fallacy because the two don't equate. So no.
Next question. Where can I get ammo for my rocket? So to Slim Jim. What about, because this is actually a serious question, because the Second Amendment, the original restriction on the Second Amendment as written, as a lot of the Second Amendment advocates would say, back in the 1700s, it said we can all have arms. But back then everybody had more or less the same weaponry. You know, I do understand there were some cans and stuff, but most of we're talking about muskets, you know, and the government didn't really have a huge advantage when it came to the type of firearms that people can use. Now we have nuclear weapons. So do you believe that now the Second Amendment could be obsolete? Because if it's really against the tyrannical government, then that really makes no sense. Like you were saying earlier, you put 5 Marines and you don't really have a chance.
I don't think it's obsolete. I mean, I'm not advocating for private ownership of pocket nukes, if that's what you're asking.
It'd be cool though. Great conversation piece.
Good, Atheist Edge.
When I leave the house with my pistol, primarily, 100% it's for self-defense. I'm taking the family to a restaurant, for instance. Of course, everyone here, and it might be a male thing, it might be a military trained thing, but don't you guys catch yourself without even realizing it? You sit with your back to the wall wherever you sit, and you get a clear view of all the exits. It's just a thing we do.
I don't do that, but I'm a soy boy, so you know.
Oh, well, I mean, okay.
I drink a lot of soy, so it's probably giving me tits and everything.
So I'm thinking, a semi-automatic pistol is ideal for that type of situation. So it's going to be, I'm just going with the odds. It's going to be a lone gunman. He's going to be spraying, and I'm going to try to find some cover. I'm going to take him out. But as far as a rocket launcher, I mean, when are you ever going to need an M203 with 40 millimeter grenades? I mean, you know what the kill radius of that is? You're going to take out the whole restaurant. I mean, when would you ever need that anyway?
Here's the thing. I play a lot of Fallout, so I would say check dumpsters. The yellow ones are good, and then the little green ammunition thing. Sometimes there's good ammo in those. Those are the three places to check.
I think there's an interesting question that comes from the live chat. It says, how you can justify judging a group by a minority of bad apples, and I'll throw that to Progressive Liberal and Atheist Edge, because that seems to be the argument. You have a couple of, but the majority of people are okay, but maybe 1 to 2% of people who are actually doing these things. Now we want to change it for everybody.
Murder rate, the gun murder rate is lower than the Alzheimer's death rate. It's lower than heart disease by far. It's lower than traffic fatalities by far. So I can see that point. I don't know.
It's much more easily preventable than any of the things that you listed.
How do you feel about that, Jim?
I disagree.
Okay.
I mean, as
Sure.
Atheist Edge pointed out that 25% of mass shootings are perpetrated with an unlawfully owned weapon.
Unregistered weapons, yes.
And those are just documented mass shootings. I mean, we're not talking about inner city drive-bys. We're not talking about random outbreaks of gang violence. How do you propose how does preventing me, a lawful registered firearms owner, from owning a particular firearm, how does that stop the aforementioned instances of violence?
So I think Jim is making the argument that's usually made here in New York, is that the criminals are going to get guns anyway. Like here in New York City, it's extremely illegal to have a gun. If you see somebody with a gun here in New York, you call the police, and it's very so bad people do bad things. They break laws, and they're going to break the gun laws. So I'm going to throw it to Jim for Atheist Edge, then to Progressive Liberal. What do you guys think about that? Criminals break the law. Go ahead.
Yeah, I heard what you said, but I had one saved round. Sorry for the pun. It's kind of one saved round, and I'm going to get back on progressive side, which was where I belong on this. And something we didn't address is smart weapons. Think fingerprint technology. This technology is useful. It's good now. It's tested. The reason you don't see it here is because of NRA lobbying against it. They don't want it. I want to know what Slim Jim thinks about this, and I think that's a great viable happy medium. A way we could come together is the utilization of these thumbprint smart guns.
Hold on, let me get Progressive Liberal in here first, because he seemed like he wanted to respond to the question.
Yeah, I forgot what the question was. I'm sorry. I started listening to you said.
Let me throw to Slim Jim then to respond. Go ahead, Slim.
Well, so the beautiful thing about my Glock 26 is it's entirely mechanical. It doesn't need batteries. It's not susceptible to any kind of firmware or any, Y2K bugs or anything like that. I insert the magazine, chamber around, pull the trigger, or press the trigger, really, and it fires. I don't have to worry about the fingerprint scanner being dirty. Like, my phone doesn't unlock half the time because the scanner's dirty. My pistol is 100% mechanical. My patrol rifle is 100% mechanical. My duty or my issued weapon in the National Guard Armory, 100% mechanical. When the lights go out and that EMP hits, my guns will keep firing. Will the fingerprint scanner keep working?
Well,
Good point. Good point.
Let me throw it to a question from the chat. It says, if it's all about death, and I think this is a progressive liberal, here we go. If it's all about death, why won't people give up their cars and alcohol? Because guns don't affect them. If it's about deaths, public transportation would be the only option.
First of all, it's a perversion of the argument. The argument is that the Second Amendment provides a constitutional right to own something to own a thing, and that thing's singular purpose is to kill people. A car's singular purpose is not to kill people. Cars can kill people. Knives can kill people. I could stab my glasses into my own eye and go into my brain, which I'm sure a lot of people would be fine with, but I'm not going to. Bad news. But that's not its singular purpose, right?
I mean, you seem okay to me.
Thanks, buddy.
Well, it's not singular purpose. There's two other purposes: sport shooting, target shooting, and hunting.
Okay.
I'm a vegetarian, but I would love to still have that right if I ever wanted to hunt.
Okay, a desert eagle is not designed for hunting deer. Okay. An AR-15. I mean, if you took an AR-15 and you shot a deer at anything closer than freaking 400 yards, you wouldn't have venison for dinner. You'd just have some, I don't know, pre-made soup.
Do people use AR-15 to hunt? It is a short barrel rifle.
It's a varmint round.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that's not its singular purpose, right?
We used to go javelina hunting with ARs in Texas.
Okay. I should have said this better. I'm not going to go duck hunting with it. I'm not going to go deer hunting with a 30-06 or something. Okay. So there are certain guns that, I can't, there are hand cannons for taking down bears. But you're not going to try to take down a bear with a 9mm unless you're really brave and stupid, or you have no other choice, I suppose. My point is that a gun's singular purpose is to kill things. I said people. I should have just said things. That is its purpose. There's nothing else that we have. Cars, that's not their singular purpose. Glasses, that's not their singular purpose. Knives, most knives, that's not their singular purpose. I've heard people make the argument about scalpels before, which just infuriates me. However, the point here is that we're talking about restricting guns because guns are killing people. People are dying, and they're not even dying to guns, right? They're dying to bullets. Like, the other thing is that the argument's about the wrong thing.
Restrict the bullet?
Would be fine with everyone owning every kind of gun if we highly restricted and outlawed most ammunition.
It's funny that's Chris Rock's joke. He says, make the bullet $100 and you have a lot more.
Yes, and I remember the first time I heard him do that bit, and I was like, God, that's brilliant. And it's true. Jim, you're not allowed to just go down to the armory and get as much ammo as you want, right?
No, but I can go to Walmart and get all the ammo I want.
But my point is that you can't go to the military gives you your. I don't know what you use. Do you use an M16? What's your issue?
I use an AR-4 or an M4. Sorry,
an M4. Okay, so you can't go down.
M16 A4 and an M4 all use 5.56mm rounds. Yeah,
sure. But my point is, you can't go down to the armory and say, "Hey, I need my weapon and I need 1,000 rounds." That's restricted in some way because you don't need that much ammunition. And I think civilians don't need that much ammunition either. You just don't need it. And the only argument that I've heard against it that's somewhat reasonable is, what about practice? Okay, well, when you go to the gun range to practice, you're allowed to buy as much ammunition as you want. but you can't take it home with you. There should be restrictions on how much ammunition a person can have at home. And I don't know if it's 100 rounds or what, but that's a thing that I'm hugely in favor of.
So let me put up.
Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
Let me put up a hypothetical here. All right. Let's say the place where I live, we got riots going on. And let's say I got one of them shops where we live in the back or on the second floor. And whole mess of people coming down the street, dragging people out, beating them down, throwing bricks, Molotov cocktails through the windows, you name it. And I'm only allowed 10 rounds of 9mm. How am I going to defend my family?
I mean, if Superman shows up, we better all have kryptonite, right? I don't. It's a hypothetical situation. That's not something. El Paso happened.
Actually, that's not a hypothetical situation. That happened in the LA riots and in the Detroit riots.
Okay.
El Paso was, where did that take place? That was did it move from a strip mall to like a Walmart, right? It was multiple locations where he went?
No, that was the other one in Texas.
Oh,
Dayton.
okay.
There was one question that I actually wrote down, and I don't want to throw it to the panel. Specifically to Progressive Liberal and Atheist Edge. It seems like you guys would be in favor of a repeal of the second. Well, not Atheist Edge, but I think I'm sorry, Progressive Liberal. It seems like you would be in favor of a repeal of the Second Amendment for all the.
No, that's not true.
For it. Okay, so for the Second Amendment as is, are you understanding the interpretation of the amendment, or because you keep saying this amendment gives you the right to have a weapon that'll kill people? How do we change that without in some way amending that amendment?
Oh God, I'm back in. I feel like I'm back in government 320, I believe it was, where I had these debates all the time. And no, I like it. I'm not complaining.
No, it's cool. It's cool.
I think that the singular issue is I know that he was joking, but I think that the singular issue is about ammunition. I think that it's about magazine sizes, and I think that it's about background checks, and I think that it's about mental health checks. I don't think that it's about guns. First of all, prohibition doesn't work. I don't care what you prohibit, it doesn't work. We got into trouble with drugs. We're still fighting a war on drugs that will never end until we legalize them and regulate them. Guns need to be similarly regulated and controlled, just like alcohol is, just like tobacco is. There's no reason why guns shouldn't be regulated the same way, taxed, and we make tax revenue off of it. I think that the problem is that the argument's not about guns. Should we be able to, what did I say before we came on the air? Glue a Desert Eagle onto our bazooka and drive our tank to work? Probably not. But I think that the issue is about ammunition, magazines, background checks, and mental health, and maybe insurance too.
And training and bump stocks.
Let me throw it to Atheist Edge.
Training.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Slim Jim.
I know it'd probably be the other Jim. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry.
No, I just wanted to say, with gas prices being what they are, I sure as hell ain't driving my tank to work.
Absolutely.
It sounds like I cut you off, Atheist Edge. What's up?
Bump stocks too. There's absolutely no reason for that, but that's it's a sticky wicket because they're so easy to just make it home anyway. So I don't know what you would do about that. But training is, and I know training, we talked about this at the top of the show, but you did, all of you made some really good points about how that infringes on your actual constitutional right. I get that, but I just feel like there ought to be some major. I mean, I would be for, if you own a weapon and you have a license to carry, you're at the range minimum once a month. And if you skip a month, you got to make up those hours on the next month. And if you skip 3 months, you get your firearm suspended for 6 months.
Now, I mean, think about this real quick. My stepmom was a realtor. Okay, she was a realtor, and she had to get continuing education and renew her license every 2 years to sell homes.
Well, you know what? I do want to throw this out here, though, because the argument on the other side is always going to be, hey, listen, everything you guys are saying is great. But if we started talking about putting these type of restrictions on other rights, then it would be outrage. Okay, well, to the right to vote. You know what? Some people are just too stupid and make stupid decisions when voting. So we should give them a test, or we should make sure they can read, or we should have these type of obstacles before, and then we would all be no. And the proponents of the Second Amendment are saying this is a right in the Constitution, like it or not. And your argument isn't with the right; it's with the process in changing that right. Yes, well, you can have no matter what happens at the end. The right is the right, and if you do want to change it, then go through the process and get the amendment changed to something that you like. But if you can't do that, your argument is with democracy and not with the Second Amendment. You're about to say something.
Point. I mean, we don't really have a right to vote. There's no constitutional right to vote.
That is true. That is true. It's not a constitutional right to vote.
And if we required people to be able to read and write to vote, Trump would not be in office right now. I'm just joking. I'm sorry.
And just for people in the audience about the right to vote, U.S. citizens do not have the right to vote. That is 100% true. And if you want to know an example, Puerto Rico, for instance, if you were to make it and you now have your residency in Puerto Rico, you would lose your right to vote in federal elections. But if the state gives you the right to vote, then they have to give everybody the right to vote equally. So Slim Jim is correct at that. But I was using the right to vote because people usually associate the right to vote. And there's an amendment about the poll tax. So
there is. And we need election reform, and Puerto Rico and DC both need to be states. But go on.
So is the argument? So it seems like we do have a agreement. Don't change the amendments.
Right.
But now the agreement is what to do. Do we allow people to how do we allow people to exercise that right?
Major reforms.
Is saying revisions, and Slim Jim is saying what? What is your argument? What restrictions should be placed on the Second Amendment that would be acceptable to you, Slim Jim?
I'm saying roll back the restrictions.
Say it one more time.
I'd say roll back the restrictions.
So you're saying roll back the restrictions to what? What would be something that's reasonable to you?
Well, I mean, you look back at World War I, right? We had veterans returning from World War I with Browning automatic rifles. And when was the last mass shooting with a Browning automatic rifle? Oh, there wasn't one.
Well, there were a bunch in France, but none here. Where the war happened. Come on with the joke. Come on, guys. Come on.
Oh no, yeah. I was about to say,
yeah,
in the trenches.
Right. Yes, that was the joke. Yes, I didn't land, but go on. I'm sorry.
So I mean, the issue of mass shootings only became a really big problem in our generation's recent memory. I think that it initially goes back to, I think it was the mid to late 60s with the clock tower shooting. Was it Texas? Was it Texas?
University of Texas, Charles Whitman. He was a U.S. Marine. I'm sorry, everybody. And so was Lee Harvey Oswald. Marines are really good shots, and when they snap, yeah.
But don't forget about remember going postal before it was, before we had the term going postal, and that meant a postal worker because they were the ones that used to do the mass shootings. Go ahead, Jim. Sorry to cut you off.
I was just gonna say God has a hard on for Marines because they kill everything they see, right?
Oh man.
We have devolved into that now.
Yes.
When you started citing their Marine backgrounds, I just had Full Metal Jacket flashbacks.
But Jim, you're talking about rolling back restrictions, and I'm trying to understand like anything specific that you're talking about. For instance, if there's background checks, there's waiting periods. Are you talking about rolling all of those back? Like in your understanding, what would be something that you would think would be reasonable that you would say, okay, this is how gun laws should be?
Yeah, well, I would just go back to probably the pre-30s state of affairs. You had very few gun deaths, but widespread firearms ownership with fewer federal regulations governing the purchase and transfer and ownership of said weapons. And veterans were allowed to bring their issued weapons home and retain them. I mean, we didn't have any issues back then, and I honestly don't see. I guess I don't think that adding any of those restrictions. I mean, we added more of those restrictions, and we have more problems.
Well, Atheist Edge, what do you think? 1930s, everything was kind
Math doesn't add up, right?
So yeah,
I think the Browning, you know what? I don't know if I've ever actually held a Browning automatic rifle, but I think the magazine capacity is very small. You all think it's maybe 10 rounds? I'm not sure, but the magazine capacity of a AR-15, M4, M16, A4, minimum 30 rounds. So that right there is probably around triple what a Browning has.
Well,
So
you can
again,
get
what was it?
I said you can get 15 round mags for them and 10 rounders.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Magazine capacity, high capacity magazines. Oh, at the top of the show, Progressive talked about the drum magazines. Of course, I'm with them on that. I mean, there is absolutely no. When are you going to be in a prolonged firefight? I just don't know if
right.
that's
Like,
necessary.
how many deer are you hunting at once?
Or how many?
Understand.
You're. I mean, I'm thinking about that active shooter. He's by himself. It's going to take, I don't know, give me 10 rounds. I'll put him down. I'll probably put him down the first one. Just give me some, I don't really need more than 10 or 15.
Well,
I don't know.
So studies actually show that in a shooting event, most people end up expending 3 times the amount of rounds they count. So when you're talking like, yeah, maybe I put like 6 or 7 rounds into the guy, well, really you just dump the whole Glock 17 into the dude.
Yeah, right? The adrenaline factor.
Yeah. So, and it goes back to the riots example, a real world example where a drum magazine would have gone a hell of a long way towards defending my property and my family.
I mean, it also went a hell of a long way towards killing a bunch of people. So I get the issue is, again, like we said earlier, the constitutional right between somebody owning a gun or owning a drum magazine and the constitutional right of other people to not be killed by somebody who's owning those sorts of weapons.
Well, what constitutional right is that?
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That's the Declaration of Independence.
Which is from the Declaration of Independence.
Unalienable, right?
But
just a clarification, the 14th Amendment does have, the right to.
Sure, yeah, that's where I was going to go. Was the 14th? I would say it would be the 14th Amendment. Would probably be where you would get, the rights to privacy, of course, and a right to exist would probably be enshrined there.
Right to privacy from whom?
Well, right to not be killed.
Yeah,
federal that's what he's talking about. You have the right.
I mean, I would say, it's the 14th Amendment that ensured Roe v. Wade, right? Because the Supreme Court said, well, according to the 14th Amendment, you have a right to privacy. You have a right to bodily autonomy, which is the right to exist. And that's why a fetus in the 3rd trimester that is viable has the right to exist, because it's no longer dependent upon the bodily autonomy of the person carrying it. So that's where I would go, and I would think that the Supreme Court would definitely cite the Declaration of Independence and Jefferson's words as part of that if it were to come up in court.
Has the Supreme Court ever gotten anything wrong? Citizens United.
I mean, if that's where we're going, that the Supreme Court gets things wrong, then you're throwing out all of the precedent that gives you gun rights right now. So I really would say don't go down that road. That would be don't use that.
Well, but if you're going to say, well, I'm sure the Supreme Court would back my position, implicitly saying that, I mean, you have to factor in that the Supreme Court has probably got something wrong before.
I mean, I agree. The Supreme Court has gotten things wrong, but the reason that the Second Amendment is interpreted the way that it is because of rulings by the Supreme Court. So if we're going to have an argument about what the Supreme Court is right or wrong about, we're going to do another 3 hours on all kinds of shit.
That's not the point I'm trying to make. My point is that rhetorical appeal to the Supreme Court might be erroneous.
Okay, but it's not a rhetorical report. That it's not rhetorical that the 14th Amendment enshrines bodily autonomy. It does. That's why Roe v. Wade. That is the decision of Roe v. Wade.
It enshrines autonomy and privacy from the government, but not from each other. You keep citing the 14th Amendment as your protection against me. There is no constitutional protection from between you and me.
But just point of clarification, because I'm a lawyer and I know they'll kill me in the chat. There is one, well, the 13th Amendment, and there's a one against prohibition. That's my. But for instance, the 13th Amendment, you can't own slaves. It's a person. It's the only constitutional right that for individuals.
That's a good point.
But Jim is making a good point. All of these rights that we're talking about are, again, except for the 13th and the other one, is against government intrusions, against personal conduct, not against two individuals. So is that a difference? Does that mean something in this context? Remember, I can tell you whatever you want, and you can't say, you had
right. No.
You don't have a
I did 2 videos recently on abortion where I looked into the ruling by the Supreme Court. So I'm just trying to remember exactly how it was worded.
Can I interject?
So Roe v. Wade.
Can I interject just one thing that
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, please.
Appreciate it. I am by no means, and I want to make this absolutely clear, I am by no means attempting to justify the death of the person you cited before.
Octavia.
Oh, yeah. Right? No, I think we're clear about that. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It is a terrible and it is a tragic thing. I have worked in law enforcement before. I was a local cop. And I mean, a mother and her son got schmucked by a drunk dude crossing the street. Accidental deaths are a horrible thing. They are absolutely a horrible thing. And yes, I do agree that we should work collectively to minimize them as much as possible. I just want to say that I do not think that government restrictions are the best way, a just way, or a moral way to do so.
Let me get Jim from Atheist Edge in here just real quick. Go ahead.
Another way, okay, in line with Slim Jim, to keep it like we have now, but another good way is social pressure. Guys like you and me, Slim Jim, and people that have the training to apply that social pressure. I don't think we're doing our job. I don't think that's why every time I see someone open carrying in, a convenience store, I make a point to walk up to him and just, hey, just in a casual way. I'm not threatening, non-confrontational, but hey, when's the last time you've been to the range? What are your 5 weapon safety rules? I know that that might be a toe in the door. It's a start. It doesn't infringe on his rights. It's just me kind of probing. And I haven't been to the range, in a couple of years. Hey, you might want to think about going and doing that.
Hey, Atheist Edge, can you do us one favor? Can you tell everyone what those 5 rules are? Because you mentioned
wait, let me guess.
No, anyone.
Let progressive guess first.
Let me guess. Okay, so number 1, don't shoot people you like. Number 2, no, I don't know what they are. Go ahead.
1, never fire. Treat every weapon as if it were loaded. Don't. Wait. Hold on, Slim Jim. It's been a little while. Treat every weapon as if it were loaded. Don't fire.
Point.
Keep your weapon on safe. That's number 3. Keep your weapon on safe.
Where's it?
Keep your fingers straight and off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Mm-hmm. Know your target, what lies behind it, and I'm missing one. Never fire. Never point at anything you do not intend to shoot.
There it is.
Yeah. Good job. Good job. Wow. You did way better than I did.
But you're progressive a little because you were making a point about abortion.
Right. Oh, yes. Okay. So what the Supreme Court said in Roe v. Wade was the states don't have the right to regulate abortion in the first trimester. They can put limited restrictions in the second trimester, and in the third trimester, you can't prohibit anything. So you can, some, and none, right?
Well, hold on. Just to be clear.
Or maybe I did it back.
But just to be clear, that was overturned in Planned Parenthood.
I do. No.
Okay.
I'm just talking about this particular ruling. I don't want to get into nuance right now. Yeah. Because I'm trying to answer Jim's question. I keep pointing the wrong way. Jim's
got it.
So, Dr. Jen Gunter is somebody that I follow on Twitter, and I quoted her story in my one abortion video. She's an obstetrician and gynecologist who's performed abortions. Kansas, back in the 1990s, enacted this law that said that abortions couldn't be performed on state grounds at state hospitals. and a woman in her first trimester was experiencing kidney failure. And her doctor said, she probably needs an abortion. That's probably what's causing the kidney failure. And so Dr. Gunter called the person who wrote the law and said, listen, am I going to get arrested if I do this? And he cut her off before she could even finish her question. He said, you just do whatever you think is best. And she performed the abortion. The woman survived. So I would say that the state wasn't involved between Dr. Gunter and that woman. That was a doctor performing a medical procedure that saved that woman's life. So I don't think that your assertion is 100% true, but it is a good point. And I want to think more about it and maybe do a video on it. But you raise a really, really good point about whether it has to do with state involvement or not. And I need to think more about it.
So long as we're getting each other thinking, I guess that's the important
absolutely
part, right?
For sure.
We're getting close. Compromise. See, we like to bring people together. We like
right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So at the end of the day, because we have maybe about 8 minutes left. At the end of the day, have we accomplished anything? What are the best solutions? Because we all agree there's a problem, but we all disagree about the solutions to that problem. So for each one, take a couple of minutes and just explain what would the ideal solution be that you believe that would limit the mass shootings and things that we have and the problems that we have with gun ownership now. I'll throw it to Atheist Edge real quick. Go ahead.
Number one, more training. I've stressed that enough. High capacity magazines. So I'm for keeping the Second Amendment. I'm for major reforms. High capacity magazines, bump stocks. We called the gun show loophole, but Slim Jim has locked me on, so we need to find another name for that. Way stricter and longer and more in-depth background checks. High-risk mental illnesses, high risk meaning a propensity to hurt yourself or others, and maybe look into not just violent felons, but other types of violent crimes, violent misdemeanors. And so basically, long story short, keep the Second Amendment, major reforms. And I want to be able to walk into Walgreens and not see Joe Schmo with a Glock on his hip it's on and the safety's off. And I see the red dot. He's walking around a condition 1 weapon with the round in the chamber and it's on fire on his hip. I don't want to see that.
Progressive liberal, go ahead.
The justification for Megan's Law allows the sex offender registry, is that I need to be able to protect my family and know where sex offenders live around me. Why isn't there a similar database that I can search for guns? Why can't I know what guns are owned near me and who owns them? I think that is a national database that should exist. I think that all gun owners should have to have insurance, liability insurance, so that if their gun is used in a way that harms someone else, that person's medical costs are covered. I agree. No bump stocks, no high capacity magazines. Civilians don't need hollow point ammunition. Are you fucking kidding me? Universal background checks, and they should be 10 days. And the Senate needs to pass the 2 gun laws that were passed in the House by Democrats earlier this year. Mitch McConnell needs to get up off of his fat turtle ass and pass them.
All right. Slim Jim, you're going to have the last word on this. The other thing you got to say is I agree with the other guys. That's it, right?
Well, first off, I want to apologize for being late. The mitigating circumstances, I had little control over that, but I do feel like I owe the panel and the audience an apology, so I'm sorry about that. There is no denying that the United States does have a gun violence problem, not only with mass shootings, but just in day-to-day violence. However, I believe that the root causes of these problems are moral, social, and maybe to an extent rooted in economics, and not necessarily the results of this hunk of metal and polymer sitting in my pocket or strapped to my back or resting in my safe. Robert A. Heinlein once said, an armed society is a polite society. I think that if we as people, take the onus upon ourselves to be responsible for our own safety and our own protection, we would honestly see a marked decrease in widespread violence. That being said, thanks very much for putting up with me, guys.
It was a pleasure.
I enjoyed myself. This is probably one of the most enjoyable two-way conversations I've ever had.
Oh, wow. That's high praise. All right. Hey, listen, guys. First, I want to thank the panelists, and I want to give you guys each a second. Please tell the people where you can find them. If in the internal chat, the private chat, if you can, just grab your links and throw them in there, and I'll talk and throw them in the live chat. But tell the people where to find you. Tell them what they can find on your channel. We'll start with you, Jim, since we had you go last. First time, we'll let you go first. Tell the people where they can find you and what you do.
So like I said, I'm in the military. I serve in the, I'm in the military. I'm in the Army, to be more specific. And I guess the best way to find me, I really don't have a social media presence anymore. You can find me, I guess, if you search either the Slim Jim or Jim W on YouTube. I don't really have any content on the Slim Jim channel anymore. But I will give a link out for the hosting for the Jim W channel. I haven't put any content on that channel, like 3 years though. So,
Atheist Edge.
Atheist Edge on YouTube, Atheist Edge on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, Stitcher, FM Player. We flew John Loftus, the author, down from Indiana just recently. So we have that in our library if you want to go and check out the in-studio interviews we did with him. December 21st is our next big event. It's a solstice party here in Dallas-Fort Worth, and we've got Seth Andrews as our guest speaker from Thinking Atheist. That's, did I say Patreon? Patreon, Atheist Edge as well. That's it.
Hey, listen, thanks everyone for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and please visit these guys' channels. I know I'm subscribed to Atheist Edge and Slim Jim because I used to watch Slim Jim's videos until he stopped making them. But I'm going to be subscribed to Progressive Liberal like as soon as I hit this checkbox. So
Thanks,
please,
man.
Go and subscribe to these guys' channels. They do great work. And next week we're going to be talking about something a little bit controversial. It's going to be transgendered athletics and whether transgendered women should compete with cis.
Wow.
So I know it's going to be a bomb. Yeah.
I get my sign.
So we have some real heavy hitters that we're going to have next week talking about it, and it should be fiery. But again, the show's going to take no position, just like we did today. No position on the topic. We're just going to let people make the arguments and see what comes up. So that'll be in 2 weeks. Again, thanks again for watching. I'm your host, Nate Brody, for Atheist Edge, Progressive Liberal, and Slim Jim. You should do it like Macho Man Randy Savage is doing. Snap it to
Right?
a Jim. Oh yeah.
oh yeah.
My name is Nate Brody, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Don't forget, like, share, subscribe, and I'll talk to you later. Peace.
Good night, everybody.
I think Dragnot fell asleep. Dragnot, take us home.